Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I've got a very special guest, Mr. Roger Christian. He's above me here. I have a feeling he might be next to me, depending on how this lays out when we record it. How are you today, Roger?
I'm very good, thank you.
You're originally from England. Where
Yeah,
are you now?
Toronto, next door to you. I live here now, so it's kind of midway between LA um, and London. And I've made a lot of films here, and I really liked living here, so I
Nice.
set up here. Yeah,
Yeah, you found your spot.
yeah, found a spot for now.
Um,
But,
so we're talking today because we had you involved in this edition that we're doing of the Gaffy sticks from Star Wars, this prop replica. We will get to that eventually, but I think a lot of folks probably know your work, but maybe don't know you yet. And I think it's one of those things where you've had this lasting impression on people who might not even know what you've done or that it happened. So I want to kind of dig in a little bit before we dive into the sales stuff.
right,
Um,
yeah. So yeah, you want to do it?
no, I mean,
Go
yeah,
on then.
the question I always have is like, was was where you ended up, film stuff, making cool things for movies, making films, things like that. Was that where you wanted to be from the start?
I wanted to make movies. I as a I hated school like most directors. We always have a difficult time, and I managed to get out and get to art school. And when my first year, I got 6 of the O-level exam results in everything else because I was treated like a human, not like the way that they used to treat kids in the early days in England.
Mm.
And I just had to get into the film industry. I went to see a mate of mine and he bought an old Jag Mark 7 for £50. And we went to London to watch Dr. Zhivago and A Man and a Woman, a Claude Lelouch film. And I had an out-of-body experience watching Zhivago in this huge cinema and just said, wow, I got to do this. I didn't quite understand what it was.
Right.
And then surviving while I was at art school, I used to put up marquees all over the south of England for this company in Reading where I lived. And one day we noticed a prison camp next to where we're putting up all these big tents. And I went over to look and I said, what's going on? And they said, oh, we're building a prison camp for a movie. And I said, well, it looks real. What? And they said, yeah, it's so real. We got a homeless guy comes past every day to give us food. He thinks we're prisoners.
Oh,
And I said, what's this for? And they said, it's Pinewood Studios next door. So my mate and I got under the fence. We couldn't get in, obviously. We got under a fence, found a hole, got in, and there they were shooting the first James Bond film, and the doors were open, and the smell and the lights, and watching it. And I went, wow, I got to be part of this.
that's
That was
magic.
that was my magic moment, my holy grail moment, my
And
looking at
how? Yeah. There's like
it's,
literally a glow of the lights coming out of the doorway,
yeah,
bring
and
you in, and the smells, and
yeah, it
that's
was my
visceral.
Luke looking at the twin sons moment.
That's it. Yeah. John Williams just following around
Yes,
making music.
exactly. And I just wrote endless letters and eventually got an interview with an art director who was just finishing this huge Department S TV series, who said, I'll take you on, but I've set you up with an appointment for a designer friend of mine at Shepperton. And I made all my way down there. It was John Box who designed Dr. Zhivago. And the first man, Charlie Bishop, who I met, was in charge of the Ice Palace on Dr. Zhivago. He created the whole thing. And John Box took me on, said, if you don't mind making the tea and coffee, I'll take you on. We're just starting this huge movie, Oliver. And I said, I don't care what I make. I just want to be in.
You just
And
want to be there.
but he was just a wonderful man who took me under his wing, because I came from art school like with hair down on my shoulders and Cuban boots and jeans, and I entered a world of suits and ties and short haircuts and get straightened out, boy. Stop watching all these art movies. That's nothing to do. You get a job, you're here, and do this. John completely supported me, and until I eventually, they knew I could draw. He knew I could draw up sets. He knew I could do stuff. I made sure they knew that. And eventually I started to make work of worse and worse tea and coffee. I watched them grimace as they drank it. I took a gamble and I got promoted.
That's
And I
great
ended up
advice for anyone watching. This is how you get promoted.
yeah. And I ended up working with Charlie Bishop, the first guy who I met, who put me on Randall and Hopkirk. And within a few weeks, the set decorator had a mental breakdown. That they were brutal schedules.
Hmm.
And I'd drawn up a set that they happened to say was one of the best sets they'd ever had. And I was pulled down to the floor to meet the director and the big producer and the financiers, and they're all standing there. And I thought, oh, they hated this
There's
set. They
this
can't
long-haired
shoot on
kid,
it.
you know.
Yeah, I'm going to get fired. And they said, no, would you like to be the set decorator from now on? And that was it. Off I went, and like loving it. And I built my way up, going through Star Wars, Alien, and Life of Brian. I thought those three, I
Yeah.
was getting offers. I was offered Conan to with John Milius, which, oh, did I want to do it? But I'd stuck to my guns. I had this short film I'd written, Black Angel, and I had
Right.
to make
Give
it,
a
and I
poster.
stuck to my guns. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, that's the one. And George read the script by chance. It wasn't sent to him except by Fox, and he commissioned it to go out with Empire Strikes Back. And that kind of launched me. And then this next short film I made, because the first one I was trying to be Kurosawa, and it was very visual and set in Scotland, and I had £25,000. I had nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
From a government grant. They were ending the grants. The guy who was head of Paramount in the UK had me in for a meeting and said, we want to go out with a bang. It's finishing the grants. Will you come up with a last short for us? Because we loved what you did with Black Angel. And I came up with this script, this young guy. I'd gone back to film school actually to help avert from taking a job because I was broke. And this young producer gave me this script called The Dollar Bottom that was a small book written by James Kennaway, very famous Scottish writer who wrote Tunes of Glory, got Academy Award nomination for it. And it was so beautiful, this story. We made that, and it won an Academy Award as Best Dramatic Short Film. So that's actually why I was talking on the news here today about the Queen, because we were invited to the palace to meet the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh, because I'd made something culturally important to Britain. And so that led to me just building up and up to a career directing and filmmaking, which is what I wanted to do. I still take my hand. I was asked by friends of mine own a company here in Toronto called Marble Media. They did a series called Overlord and the Underwoods, which has been a huge success. It's gone out all over. They called me and said, look, we're having trouble. Would you do we know we don't do this anymore, but would you design a robot for us that's a small little creature that is from another planet, but he's a watchdog. And Overlord was a full costumed actor who'd been sent down from another planet as a punishment to live with an American black family. So I got those designed and made for them. So I keep my hand in sometimes. It was agony. We need you guys here in Toronto. There was no one who could do it. They farmed it out to Vancouver. Can you imagine? It arrived from Vancouver through customs on the day before shooting. No battery for it, nothing. I was there trying to get it going. Good luck. Yeah, good luck.
Yeah,
we need you guys here.
I'll tell you, keep this in mind. We're around. It is interesting, and I feel like the schedules get shorter and shorter over the years. You talk about people having nervous breakdowns 40 years ago. It's like I can't even imagine what they would do now, because we get calls on stuff and it's, when do you need it? Tuesday. It's like, it's Monday, like, what are you doing?
No, it's, and Toronto's, I mean, just during COVID, there were 32 TV shows and movies shooting in this city. Still now to this day, Netflix have now opened 2 massive stages here. The crews are now as good as anywhere in the world. They've had so much work, but my friend is producing and directing them. They shoot them in 12 days and edit in 12 days and just throw them out into into
amazing.
live stream. So yeah, you have to cope. We have to
Yeah,
keep going, you know,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
nothing you can do.
You either keep up with the current or you get pulled away by
Yeah,
it, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Um, we so obviously the all of this stems from, so would you call it pestering people? Like, it sounds like you wrote enough letters until they couldn't ignore you anymore. Is that, the MO to get a job? Is that your best advice for young folks trying to get in?
Yeah, it's it's like I always say to them, listen, if you've been trying to get over this brick wall and your fingers are down to the bone and your feet are out and somebody's kicking you in the ribs with your jack boots on at the bottom, and you go, you know what, I'm going to get over this wall. That's the film industry. If you've got talent as well, that's a big bonus.
Right.
So
Yes.
no, I mean, I knew nobody. I had no contacts, nothing. I just was writing letters and trying. And I sold my car because I had no money left, and I had to hitch a lift home. And an architect picked me up, and we were chatting, and he felt sorry for me. And he said, well, listen, that when they did Cleopatra, they hired architecture draftsmen. One of my people worked on it. He's the one who set me up with a lead that went to a job.
You
You
never
know,
know
and
what's going to lead to that break, that
no,
job. Any kid,
no,
any person, it could come from anywhere.
it can come from any. And the only letter I ever got back from my hundreds of letters I sent to producers and anybody I could find, one wrote back and said, look, you were at art school for 3 years. What I would suggest is try to get in through the art department, but you might need architecture.
Mm.
In my sheer brutal kind of desperation, I got into Oxford School of Architecture. In a year, I did the major exam. I had art, but I needed an economics exam. I got it by postal course in a year, got in for 2 years and did architecture. And
So
again,
you put in the
I'd
work.
made, well, I made contact that the principal was another wonderful man who took me under his wing, and he gave me my diploma for intermediate exam. And he said, Roger, I think you should go and do what you really want to do now, because you're going to be bored stiff. We're going to deal with chemical structures and beams and all of this for the next 2 years. And I did. I went off. I unpacked dresses in London. I got a train up and down every day until I got this job, and then just didn't stop. And I think, nowadays it's slightly easier in that you have, when I was like major designer art director with Life of Brian. I got 3 hits in Star Wars, Alien, and
Yeah.
Life of Brian. I was struggling to get a film made, and I realized talk is okay, but you have to prove it. So I wrote at film school a short film, Black Angel, realized I couldn't possibly do it with a budget there. And sheer chance, I was actually, I called Ridley, who was doing the sound mix on Alien, and Bill Rowe was the biggest and the best in the world then at EMI Studios. Fantastic, did everything, Kubrick's films, everybody's.
Mm.
I was sitting in watching and learning when the head of Fox came and said, what are you doing? And I told him, and he said, just send it to me. And when he read it, he said, do you mind if I send this to George? Because George hated the short film we put out with Star Wars, because there were no adverts in those days. There was a program.
Yeah.
That was it. George just came back, as a thank you to me for standing by his side on Star Wars, when he says it himself, only 5 people stood by his side on that movie, and I was one of them. And that was true. The crew thought it was a pile of rubbish. It was a children's story that would never go out. They were unhelpful. It was incredibly difficult film to make for George, but John Barry and I stood by him, and Les Daly, the art director, and we got his vision made. So to answer your question, you have to find your voice. Most people lose their voice as they grow up because it gets polished and diamonds, and people tell you, no, you can't do that, don't do that.
Yeah.
You've got to find it through your instinct and stick with it and find a voice and then start speaking it. And just try to stick to it. I know myself, when I've veered from it, I've failed, and when I've stuck with it, I've you know, and the journey, the messaging is the journey is the success. If you do what you love to the best of your ability, that's the success. Forget about Oscars and winning this and getting that and being a big star. None of that matters. It's the success that you have yourself. Like, I just look at this behind you and think it's incredible, really, when you look at it, and the artistry and the dedication to do it. That's success.
Well, and I'll thank you for our work recreating it, and I'll give credit to the folks that made it in the first place. That someone
Right.
dreamt up a character that endures.
Yeah.
Amazing. And that,
Yeah.
you know, all these years later, we can even, the fact that we're sitting and talking about this stuff is amazing. You know,
Yes.
that any film that happened, I always like to say that a film gets made is a miracle in the first place.
It should get an Oscar just to make a film.
Yeah, yeah.
There should be one.
You know, you talk about sticking by George, and I think that's interesting because, yeah, we've all heard the stories about how difficult the crew was and how, you know, nobody believed in the film. What was it that made you stick by him? What was it that kept those five with him?
Because I read a lot. After the war, you know, it was grim, and my father didn't talk to us, and it was like, you be a doctor, an architect, or a priest. That was my instructions. And
Yeah.
so I lived in this inner world. I could go to the library. I read King Arthur, I read Ivanhoe, I read the Viking, and I like science fiction. I got the Eagle annual delivered when I was like 6 or 7, and followed Dan Dare.
So
And
yeah,
so
you're reading above your level at that point, you know.
yes, yeah. And so when I met George in Mexico, and he came down to see us, you know, and he said, I'm trying to do this spaghetti Western in space. And I went, oh, music to my ears. And I said, listen, you know, Flash Gordon, I just couldn't connect to it. Anything that's made science fiction was never real. I just think spaceships should be old and greasy and dripping oil, and they're kind of repaired by the owner. I didn't know at the time, but I was describing the Millennium Falcon perfectly.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so John Barry and I were the first and the third person hired on Star Wars. And as soon as I read the script, one, I knew I couldn't make it conventionally. I knew with a budget of $200,000 that I had to do this massive epic, and John Barry with the money, I knew I had to think differently. But I also recognized the mythology. I realized, well, as soon as I read lightsaber, I went, oh, well, actually, it was a laser sword, sorry, in the first script.
Which I love.
I thought, okay, what does the world remember about King Arthur? It's Excalibur. That's what is known, and this will be the icon of this movie if and when it works. And I thought it would work at the time. So, you know, George didn't get the funding. He came to England. We set up in a tiny little studio for 4 months. There was only Les Dilly, myself, and John Barry and Robert Watts, with George and Gary, for 4 months, trying to work out how on earth to make this film with no money. Literally, we had to make R2-D2 work because there was no way to do it. There's no CGI in those days, and the radio control was primitive. We built a wooden one. The carpenter brought wood from his garage and scrounged for some other bits. We literally had no money. His top, there's a picture of the wooden one. That was a film lamp I found on a scrap heap. We got it for 10 shillings.
Yeah. So literally picking through the rubbish to
literally
make what you needed.
We had to make the right size, the speeder, Luke speeder. We didn't know if that could be made and how to do it. So we had to get the right size. The windscreen on the one that Bill, again, used wood from the garage. He had wheelbarrows. He took the wheels off his wheelbarrows and we put it on those. And we found an old, completely accident damaged Jensen in the street, and we took the windscreen off, and that became the windscreen of this. This is how we started. For 4 months till the film was actually green lit by Fox.
Do you think that there was some benefit to that? I always like to say that, you know, limitations force creativity. Do you think
Yes.
that by forcing yourselves into the scrap heaps and into the rubbish bins and pulling stuff off of broken cars, you got that realism that you were after?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that, when I just thought I stuck bits onto the wooden R2-D2. I found some aircraft lights and
Oh,
stuck
right.
the little things and those on. And I thought, this will work for the sets. And I'd gone to see bombers, and I'd gone to see a submarine to look at it inside. And I thought, how do I get this? I know, I'll use airplane scrap. By chance, no one wanted it then, and it was
Right.
sold by weight, and aircraft are light. So it's only because George Lucas had made THX as an independent filmmaker that he understood when I went into his office and said, listen, I can't afford to make the sets. We don't have time to do it through the process. If I get airplane junk, I can create the look you want for the Millennium Falcon, and I can make props out of bits of old camera and everything. He said, yes, try it. Any other American director would have shown me the door and said,
Right.
go,
No,
please.
you have to
That's
make
it.
something special for us. Right.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
instead, you wind up with something more special and
Yeah.
really iconic at the end of the day. The this becomes the first modern science fiction that embraced that used universe, that took that look that you and George both had in mind, and has then been, imitated and duplicated ever since.
Yeah, it set the standard. I mean, Alien, we went full bore on it.
Yeah,
I had to create the whole of that interior look of the Nostromo for Ridley,
amazing stuff.
and it's still used to this day. And what happened? It's part of the success of Star Wars that the audience never questioned they were looking at something that was real. It was familiar. I mean, John Barry's genius was taking George to Tunisia and saying, here's Tatooine, I don't have to do anything. We just had to add a few domes, and Roger's going to dress technology into it. That was so cheap to shoot in Tunisia at the time. We solved a massive budget problem. So we
And
can only
created
say
a
this
look in
not
the
too
process.
loud and give a look.
Right.
You can't say it too loud, because then producers will say, oh, see, they can do it cheaply. Oh, let's cut the budget. Let's do it.
I won't. Luckily, nobody's watching. It's fine. What do you think makes a good Star Wars prop? You see lots of people make props, and then you get some people where the visuals are right and the feel is right and there's a vibe to it, and then other times they go off track. Is there something to you? Is there a secret recipe, or is it just your eye?
I think I do have a peculiar eye that's come from childhood somehow, and being born into London in the war and all of this stuff. So I do have an inherent, and I used to get my dinky toys and paint them when I was 6 to try and make them look more real. And I'd photograph them in the garden, trying to make tracks and put them in and do stuff. So there was something inherent in me that wanted to make stuff look real. They weren't toys, they were going to be real to me.
Right.
And John Barry, in my documentary Galaxy Built on Hope, we just brought out now. It's a huge kind of final. I've been able now finally to tell every story that's never been told. John Barry did say there's something kind of interesting about something that's made for something else, but it has a mystery to it and it has a function to it. And I could see that, like the lightsaber itself, when I found the Graphics handle, I just knew I'd found the Holy Grail, because I couldn't find anything that warranted the mystery and the power of a weapon for the Jedis. I knew I had to have something special, and that one was the hardest to find. But when I did find it, I thought, here it is. And then I changed it. And in the documentary, Gareth Edwards, who directed Rogue One, which is a true Star Wars movie to me, he's interesting, because he says that they showed him props when he started it, and he was looking at them all, and then he said, I dismissed this one and said, no, this looks like a World War II weapon. I mean, that's not going to fly with this. And they said, yeah, well, that's actually Han Solo's blaster. so he picked it up and he said, I realized the trick was taking something that had this really great, interesting look to it and changing it just 20%, giving it that little touch. And I think that's the secret.
Mm. So 80% mechanical, grounded, real world, 20% dressing to
Yeah.
give you 100% Star Wars Pro. That's a good
Yeah.
recipe.
And you know, and a vision of what Star Wars had to be. I mean, you know, everything, every weapon I chose matched the character.
mm,
When the blasters for the stormtroopers, I loved the Sterling Stub machine gun, and sticking a few T-strips on it and a little short clip and a few other things,
yeah,
it became a blaster that could fire, and it was real.
yeah.
Han Solo's gun, you know, I found the Mauser and I thought this is the equivalent of a Western gunslinger,
Yeah.
and adapted that with some sights on it.
You
You
got
know,
those big guns. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
yeah,
Like those big
yeah,
guns, the intimidation, the brute force coming through to get you. You know, like
yeah.
they.
Some of those I left. I didn't even change them. I just thought these
Yeah,
look
yeah.
so cool.
I think it's the Lewis gun is the one with the big
Yes,
tube on it. Like
exactly.
it just looks like a
That's the
blaster
one.
of some kind. Yeah.
Yeah.
You were about to talk about
And
Chewbacca's bowcaster, I think.
that's, I found he had a gun in Ralph McQuarrie's painting.
Mm-hmm.
And I found the bowcaster in Baptist, the gun hire place, with these balls on the end, and I just went, whoa, this is it. If I put some more of my rifle sights on top, stuck 3 of them on, it'll change it up enough. And George loved it and changed the script for it, so that became his weapon, you know. And then that's how I came to do the Tuscan Raiders, because I thought these are wild kind of tribe living in the desert. They're not going to have sophisticated weapons. They're going to have old stuff they half made themselves or anything. And then I found the gaffy stick, which I'd never seen before in Baptist, and I went, whoa, this is it. But again, I had to change it. I stuck a mace. I found a piece of a mace, drilled the end out, stuck it in the end. So I changed it 10%.
There you go. And it's that combination of old world, wooden, hand carved, fabricated, new world, metal, you know, more welded and things like that. And you have a mysterious piece of hardware now that isn't just an old Fijian war club, and it isn't just
exactly.
It's something new.
Exactly.
So you mentioned Bapti. So for folks that don't know already, can you tell us what Bapti was, and maybe talk a little about what it was like rummaging through that place? Because to me, that sounds like a dream to go do that.
It would be if you went there. Yeah, Baptist was and still is the only weapon hire place in London. They could supply weapons they did for Gandhi, for World War II, huge, like hundreds of guns, whatever you wanted. They had a massive store, and I knew the owner, Peter Bapti, very well. He lived near me, and because I rented all my weapons for them, that was the only place to go. And so I thought, you know what? And actually, I didn't tell anyone when we first started with George. I thought, you know what? Again, this was my thing. I thought I better show George what I'm thinking. So rather than talk about it, I'll go and do it. So I didn't tell them. I just called Peter Baptist, said, can you set me up in there? This is what I need. And he set me up with a table in the back, and I rummaged through. I got the Sterling because that's what I first wanted anyway. And my buyer had got me some T-strip, and I stuck that round and put a sights on. I dug through boxes. They have boxes of stuff from Ireland, from World War II, World War One. I mean, they had a samurai suit in there, black one. I took the helmet in to Lee to show George because it was beautiful black patina. That was a big influence for Darth Vader.
Right. Yeah.
So I set in there. I made that. Then I found the Mauser and thought, here's my Han Solo weapon, and I stuck the bits on it and I called John Barry on the phone, and I said, you better bring George here and come and see if I'm on the right track again, because if not, then obviously I'm out.
Right.
And George came, and that was it. The weight, the heavy. he loved them, and they could fire. We could still fire
Let
them
you
and
give you
get
the
a flame out
flash
of
for
it.
when the blaster came out.
Yeah. So George stayed with me, and we made Princess Leia's pistol together with super glue. He got his fingers covered like me. That was the kind of token of going forwards to do everything.
It is part of that recipe you were talking about before. It's that part real world, part add-ons, you know, the reality with a sprinkling of fantasy that keeps you grounded and makes everything look real. I think, you know, when you talk about Star Wars, so, you know, what's funny is you're talking about the props, you talk about dressing the sets down in Tunisia. You, what is your official title on that movie? Because it sounds like you're doing more than any one person's job at that point.
I was set decorator. I met Christopher Nolan here. They had a 75mm screening of Dunkirk, and he said to me, he said, "Listen, you did it all." And I said, "Yeah, I had to do everything." And he said, "Yeah, in those days, you had to do everything as a set decorator." He said, "Now it's all broken up, everything. You have weapons, you have this, you have robots, you have all different departments." He said, it wasn't it much better?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, it was, I never slept, but I loved it. I loved doing it. There was really John Barry and I as the two creatives. That was it. The art department were there to make it work with us, but that was it. So a set decorator was, yeah, that was the all-encompassing title.
People would hear set decorator and they wouldn't dream that you were making Han Solo's blaster. They wouldn't think you'd be involved with the Tusken Raiders or you know, going to Tunisia, baby. You know,
I made C-3PO's eyes because I came up with the idea how to do it, because I hated robots where you could see in or you could not, they weren't real or they cover them over. And I came up with this solution of one-way mirroring plexiglass inside. And I sent my buyer out, because then Ralph McQuarrie had put them lit up, and at that time there was no way to do it. Everything heated up. By sheer chance, at home, like 11 o'clock at night, to relax, I was watching a documentary on the first camera ever put down inside the body. And I phoned my buyer on the spot and I said, "Listen, these can't get hot. Find these bulbs, find these bulbs." And he did. He searched around hospitals, found them. And I managed to get a battery hidden into C-3PO, and I made the lighting up eyes.
See, kids, you watch TV and you'll learn stuff that you'll use in life. I think these are great lessons you're giving everybody.
Yeah, never give up.
You know, this is now decades later. You're still, you know, getting asked to talk about it. You're doing things like, so we just did the signature edition for the Gaffy sticks with you, where you sign the plaques. People, you know, want that connection to the people who worked on the movie, and they want to hear these stories. Some of that, I think, is obviously down to the quality of the film as a whole and the story and, you know, the mythology of it, all the stuff that drew you to the script. But what's impressive to me is how many people are fans of the props? How many people are fans of the look? Does it ever surprise you how strongly that endures?
It's kind of surprising because I never thought about it. I just got stuck in and with the script and with George and discussing it. And Ralph McQuarrie's paintings, those 6 paintings he did, were a massive kind of influence. The guy's a genius, and I bring him out a lot in the documentary. I wanted his name in lights because he's the genius of the vision of this film. And I think that I think if I'd have thought about this would happen, I probably would have thought, "Oh goodness, but I can't do it this way. Why can't I just get an old bits of cameras and make binoculars out of them?" And and a comlink. The comlink was that was a panic call from the floor. George added it into a scene. It wasn't required in the schedule, and I hadn't done it. And I was opening up a pipe junction for John Barry to show him something, and it dropped in my hand, the filter. And I went, "Wow, there's a perfect comlink." I added one ring to it.
Microphone.
Yeah. It went straight on the floor and went into his hands. George smiled, and it was being filmed in, you know. So I think, you know, Yeah, if I'd have known,
Right.
I probably would have panicked and thought, should I be able to do it? But I think my kind of intuition that everything that I created was right for the character, was right for the look of the film, and it looked real. That was what I'd never seen before in science fiction ever.
Mhm.
I think is why they've all stood the test of time and people really like them. George has created a myth for the cinema age, a legend, a new one. He's given people something to believe in. Good triumphs over evil. It's got a group of heroes. It follows the hero's journey as Joseph Campbell taught George and mentored him. And it's got more appeal than most of the religions now for young people, old people, anybody who are looking for answers. Star Wars answers it, and they may not know why.
Right.
These myths connect to the subconscious and to the heart. They connect, and Star Wars is connecting. That's why I support it. That's why, in the end, I spent 2.5 years making this documentary to put these stories as a legacy. I was almost forced to by David West Reynolds, who wrote all the early Star Wars
Right.
books, to do it, because he said, they're not in any of the making of books. There's not mentioned because no one knows. You're the only one, Roger, to tell the stories. So I took almost 3 years off, to write the book, and then
Which is
and
outstanding for anyone that hasn't picked up Cinema Alchemist. Highly recommended.
well,
Uh,
the last
um,
line in that book is, do not let anyone tell you you can't, you can. So
there you
I
go.
think, I look on these not as ego, oh, look what I did. Oh, wow, I created Star Wars. No, it's a mentoring for anybody following anything. It doesn't matter if you're, doing accounting, as long as you're doing it with a passion and a love. That's, we all need mentors. Luke could not have been Luke Skywalker and would never become a Jedi Master without Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. Everyone needs mentoring. So I thought, the best way now is to make a documentary and let everybody see the stories for real and hear them and witness what we do. Because nowadays, everybody looks on these as huge Hollywood blockbusting movies with
Right.
budgets. We had no money. We were a ragged group of cinema revolutions kind of fighting. When I first went from Lee Studios, the tiny studio, the day that Fox financed the film, we went into the big Elstree Studios. The first day there,
Mhm.
they said, you better lay all your weapons out that you've created so that we can see what was going to do and what everybody's looking towards, right?
Mhm.
The first assistant director, the prop master from the floor, all of these people stood around them. They picked up my blaster, threw it at me across the table and said, this is crap. Don't you realize we're doing a Hollywood movie with
Right.
a Hollywood director? And they went off to get me fired.
Ah,
So
yeah.
I stuck to my instinct and I stuck to my guns and I stuck to my friend George, who was a friend by then. We spent 4 months together and watching movies, and George's
Literally in the
dedication.
trenches of the creation of all of this.
Yeah,
Like making a
uh,
movie is a war, right? That's
yeah. And George is, doesn't have to say a lot, but his dedication to what he wanted to do, it shines through. And I had the same dedication, and so did John Barry. I think we were unusual at that time. Most other designers and set decorators turned it down. They just thought, this is impossible.
Mhm.
There's a way to do things, and you can't do it with 2.5 months prep and no money.
And
So
instead, you guys said not only are we going to do it, we're going to do something totally new, literally
yeah,
change the way movies are made forever. And,
yes,
too bad.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, even now, James Cameron still uses the techniques for Avatar. I mean, it just set a way to do it, which I'm really glad, because I personally happen to like all these movies. So I'm
Yeah,
seeing
same.
the results that
Well,
I can believe in.
yeah, and I think there's another thing that happens. You talk about the hero's journey, and Luke isn't Luke without Obi-Wan Kenobi and all of that stuff. But the cool thing that I see with Star Wars is not only, and I guess this happens with all film, but not only did it influence a generation in terms of emotion and religion and all of that stuff, but it influenced a generation of filmmakers and still does, and prop people and makeup artists and effects guys and guys who wanted to do models and all of these techniques, and then eventually guys who wanted to push the boundaries of effects into CG and all of that stuff.
Yes.
And all of this kind of, it's this great continued cycle. It goes, all the way back to the birth of film and through now. And it's, each generation passes something down to the next one. And you're a big part of that, and the look of this film is a big part of that. And there's a ton of inspiration. Certainly, for me, I feel I owe you a debt of thanks, because I certainly wouldn't be doing the stuff I'm doing without folks like you.
Yeah, no, it gives me the greatest kind of pleasure to do all of that. In the documentary in Galaxy Built on Hope, I've got Guillermo del Toro saying he was a young wee lad who went to the cinema and he saw Star Wars. He didn't know what it was. He went around 4 times to see it again. It made him want to be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I couldn't get the interview, but James Cameron, I got an interview with him saying, when I saw Star Wars, that was it. I had to go and be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Same as Christopher Nolan. I asked him, I said, do you remember when you first saw it? He said, it was 11 o'clock in the morning in this city in America. I remember it, and what it did to me. Gareth Edwards was saying, when you saw this film, you either had to go into space or make movies.
Right.
And this is across the board that I found this kind of inspiration, and amongst filmmakers, prop makers. Yeah, I mean, I've worked, Bill Pearson, you probably know about Bill from England, who's a model maker who I've used all over the world. He's sadly gone now, but the geniuses that surround us within the prop making world, and they're still using techniques really that we, some of us did, and the early kind of creatures on Star Wars that were done.
Oh, yeah.
And it spawned a love for science fiction. It spawned a love for fantasy, and that to me is why it's brilliant, because it's really, as you said, it's just like inspired. George's genius was he hired, and he's right till the end, he always wrote what couldn't be done.
Right.
He hired people who were young enough to have just had a bit of experience, but were not old and set in the ways like many get, to say, no, that's not how we do things. We do it like this will work. None of us had that. We just said, yeah, okay, we got to make it work. John Dykstra, Richard Edlund, myself, John Barry. The list is endless. He did the same with posters. He took people who'd never done it before, and they made classic posters. He did that on every single movie, and each one pushed them. And the important thing here is, and this is what I bring out in the documentary, he never did it for the sake of technology. He did it for storytelling.
Yes.
That's the difference.
And that really is it. It's funny, the people that were too young to know it was impossible.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Interesting call out on the posters too. That's a really good one. The Star Wars poster you have behind you is my favorite of that series.
Me too. And that's the one actually George has on his own wall.
It's so good.
I love that poster.
So good.
Yeah.
I'll circle back to the gaffy stick before we
wrap
up, just because that was the reason we're talking, but really, that goes out the window when something like that. So, for me, I was always mystified by that weapon. I always thought it was a really cool looking thing. I guess this is another sort of where things endure. Come around now, all these years later, the show The Mandalorian comes up. They bring back the Tusken Raiders, and they came to my studio to get the Totokias for the gaffy sticks, because they saw we had a mold for one years ago. And we're doing a replica of that version as well. And, that it shows up there. And then eventually Boba Fett shows up with one. What does it feel like to have made something that then actually gets reincarnated like that over and over?
I owe a huge thanks to Dave Filoni. And so because I was shocked when Boba Fett arrived in Mandalorian to whack. He doesn't use a gun. He doesn't use a pistol. He's got a Tokyo warrior stick, and he's taking out all of the all the stormtroopers. And then he gave it such a huge mystique in Boba Fett by him wanting to go and make it. And he goes to the tree where he has to get the wood, and he does. He gave it a fantastic history behind it, which, you know, for me, it was perfect, which I'd never thought about. I just thought about, this looks really cool and it would suit these guys. And we only have had one on the first Star Wars. That was the one. That's why you see him doing it. We could only afford one. I think they may have mocked up a second one in case, but that was it, my one. And
well, and eventually there's photos of it that kind of show the progression. It starts off fine. At some point, it broke on set in Tunisia, and then someone put it back together, and the point changed a little bit because it, you know, someone just did a quick repair. So by the time it gets to the archives where we have it, the point's a little different. But what's interesting was Bapti must have kept the mold from it, or had made a mold, because they had done the Rancor Keeper's Gaffy stick for Return of the Jedi. And the archives has one of those. So when we did our 3D scanning of it, we 3D scanned the hero prop that you put together, and then we scanned the point off of the Rancor Keeper one so that we could digitally fix what they had fixed.
Good.
And you know, basically turn the hands back on the clock a little bit. But these are the details that we wind up having to explore. It's like archaeology, you know.
Absolutely.
You got to make it and leave it behind. You know, can't thank you enough for being part of this edition with us, and you know, for helping us make something cool for fans. How does it feel? My last question: how does it feel knowing that fans want stuff that you made on their shelves to look at all times?
It's very gratifying that the trouble I took at the time to, you know, identify who are the characters in the script. Who is Han Solo? What would he have? What the stormtroopers have, and then Tusken Raiders, what would they have, you know? And spending a lot of time in Morocco and Tunisia in the, you know, when I was younger and stuff, I saw the kind of ethnic way that things were and adapted, you know. And these, often they didn't have money, they didn't have the sophistication, and I wanted to give that kind of, to make it real. That's always my goal, was to make everything real. How would they be? What would this be? And I think it's a justification of everything that I did, and not sleeping and worrying on the first one and finding scrap and finding bits and putting them together and covering my fingers in super glue, because there was me. I was in my office with broken cameras and anything I could find, like a magpie. I had so much junk that was interesting. It's a huge justification that care I took, and the kind of regard and closeness to George of what he was trying to do was worth it, was merited, you know. And to give science fiction, you know, I tell this story very often, that if ever in Britain at the time, you know, in the 70s, I said I was reading science fiction, I got the same comment: "Oh, it's not Shakespeare, is it?" And there's great writers in science fiction. There's nothing wrong with the genre. It's you know, and they've predicted the future. They predicted the internet. They predicted robots. They predicted so much stuff. They're visionary. And so I'm glad to be part of the awakening to the world that this has an importance and a credibility.
I think that's beautifully said. I think the world owes you a thanks for that. I certainly owe you a thanks for being a part of this edition with us and for spending so much time. And anybody watching owes you a thanks for sharing these stories. I think that it's just one more reason this stuff endures, is the people behind the scenes. Everybody that was a part of making this is why we all love it. And for me, it's just so great to bring those people into what we're doing here, and to to just chat and catch up and talk
Yeah,
about stuff is a lot of fun. And I just appreciate you being a part of this, man. Thank you so
not
much
at all.
for being on
Same
today.
for me. Yeah, goodbye. Hello to
Bye.
everyone. May the force be with you.
Nice. And cut.